Welcome everybody to the Winning Take draft coverage. I'm Dylan Mitchell here from the Winning Take. We got Brendan Smith from Hoops Nation and Evan Scheinberg from the Winning Take as well. We're here to just go through some of the stuff that's happened tonight, talk about second round stuff as it comes. So I hope you join us. Feel free to share, and let's get rolling. Obviously, we can just start with Markelle Fultz going to Philly. Personally, I think he's really going to change the culture there. You bring that guy, you probably get somewhere. You're a playoff team for sure. It's just a matter of whether they fall anywhere from 8 to 4. That's really where I can see them falling in the playoffs this year. And then, once they get there, it's youth, and whatever happens. They could be a first-round exit, or they could make a little run. So –
the way I see it so far, you can even tell Philly changed their motto from trust the process to something else. I'm completely blanking on it, but it's something new. Like, it's the next phase. Fultz really brings to their team what they need. They needed a guard that can score. They were starting TJ McConnell and Sergio Rodriguez as their 2 point guards, and they had Gerald Henderson and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot as their main 2 guards. And that gave them basically no scoring. So, the addition of Fultz, who's been compared to James Harden, Jalen Rose compared him to Bradley Beal with ball handling and passing abilities, that brings a huge boost at the combo guard position for Philly. And it'll really that one last step they needed, Fultz will really provide for them.
I like the fit. A while back, I said that perhaps Philly should have signed a point guard via free agency. I thought that Kyle Lowry would be a really good fit, but thinking about it more, Fultz is ultimately going to save them more money, and they have a lot of talented wings. They have some guys we didn't even mention. Jared Bayless was injured the whole year. He's going to be back next year and will presumably be the backup point guard, probably fighting for playing time with TJ McConnell. Nick Stauskas, who we didn't even mention, is good, and I would imagine that he's going to be the starting 2 guard next year if they decide to bring Gerald Henderson off the bench, which is what I would do. They have Robert Covington coming back. They picked up his team option almost a week ago. And if Embiid can stay healthy, if Ben Simmons can stay healthy, I think that they can realistically finish as high as the 4th seed. If you look around the Eastern Conference, the Raptors are going to get really bad, especially if Kyle Lowry leaves. The Hawks got worse. Detroit's still going to be bummy. New York is still going to be bummy. Orlando's still going to be trash. So when you look around outside of the Celtics, Wizards, and Cavs, it's pretty much wide open in the Eastern Conference. But I love this pickup for Philadelphia. They needed a point guard. They needed a franchise point guard, and they got that with this pick.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, speaking of Philly, they just took Oklahoma State's Juwan Hill with the 39th pick. Really just another athletic guard. He's a great finisher. It's going to help them score around the basket. With the guard set Brendan just talked about, he may not be seeing the court all that much. But if he can continue to work on his game, that's a quality score off the bench, quality guard off the bench who can help run the show for you. So right now we got New Orleans on the clock. Yes, really the other big news we had was Jimmy Butler going to Minnesota for the 7th pick. What do you guys think about that one? I see Brendan shaking his head.
The Jimmy Butler trade. Honestly, if you look at it, I really think that Minnesota won that trade. Or not Minnesota, excuse me, Chicago won that trade. Jimmy Butler he's in his prime right now. He's got about two years max of his pure prime, and then 1 year more of his coming out of his prime. Jimmy Butler's he's an all-star caliber player. He's been an all-star for the past 3 years. Great scorer, great finisher, great defender and rebounder, just great all-around player. But the fact of the matter is that Chicago was in a phase where they have Dwayne Wade, who's 34, just agreed to his player option, so he's coming back. They don't really have many assets and much youth on the team. Pretty much after Jimmy Butler leaves his prime, they're an old team. They don't have anybody that's young. They don't. I mean, they do. They have Mirotic, who's still relatively young, and they have Michael Carter-Williams coming off the bench, but they really don't have a lot of young talent. They traded away Doug McDermott too. So I think bringing in Zach LaVine, who's proven to be proven with such great upside, like great shooter, tremendous bounce, is a great young talent to have. Chris Dunn, who really didn't get to play very much, but could definitely have a positive impact, especially but playing behind Rajon Rondo, could really develop a better passing abilities because he's a great scorer already. And then Lauri Markkanen, who will play really well behind Mirotic because they have the same kind of game. I think that the Bulls are really just developing like a solid young core, and they're doing it without having to tank and rebuild completely. They're using their assets well, and what people haven't really realized is that the Bulls have really been shopping Jimmy Butler for a long time and looking for trade opportunities. So it shouldn't come as much of a surprise, and they really got the most out of an all-star caliber player, and it definitely helped the Timberwolves out now because with Jimmy Butler and Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns, like it's a great core for them to have with a veteran presence that'll really help them make the playoffs in the next couple of years.
I mean, I really think the biggest news from this isn't necessarily the Jimmy Butler trade. I think it's what happens with Dwayne Wade because right now he's got a player option, which he was probably going to accept just because of the money. Chicago seems to really want him out because especially what happened this year. And now that Butler's gone, they probably really want him out, get ready to tank a little bit, try to get a nice draft pick because they're probably not going very far. But he's gonna probably decline it now, we'd assume, because he's nearing the end of his career. Whether he goes and ring chasing or joins LeBron in Cleveland, or whether he goes to a place like Denver where he can try to maybe make up for what was lost this year. If he can, we're gonna have a lot of news surrounding him. He'll probably go on another free agent tour, assuming he declines. But I just don't see Wade wanting another year of that, especially with Butler going.
I get this move.
I think we just lost Brendan.
Ooh.
Let's see if we can get him back in here. That is not good. Evan, you see Wade coming back next year?
Yeah, I mean, he accepted his option, so he said he wants to come back. And he tweeted something out, and he's basically accepting the bench role and accepting the fact that he's not so much a star player on the team that's going to make the playoffs, but more is accepting his role as a veteran presence that'll help Chicago, propel themselves to a place in the rebuilding process where they have a veteran player that can mentor Zach LaVine, who has shown great signs of being up next in terms of being a star. So, it'll be his upcoming fourth season in the year, and he's come in the league, and he's coming off a bad knee injury that ended his season quite early. So I really think that having Dwayne Wade come back and act as a veteran presence and help LaVine develop his mid-range game and some of his post moves that Dwayne Wade has been known for throughout his career, will definitely help with Chicago's franchise moving forward. And I think that he can, even accepting his player option, can even get a new contract just to be that one mentor that they really need right now on their team.
All right, so I love technology, but that's what happens when you have a shitty laptop and shitty connected. What I was going to say, I think that Chicago wins this trade if LaVine doesn't turn into Derrick Rose. Because if LaVine just gets injured and injured again, obviously this is a really bad trade. It's a good trade for Chicago if LaVine stays healthy, and now they have a backcourt for the future in Chris Dunn. And obviously, Chris Dunn didn't get that big of an opportunity last year because of Ricky Rubio. But Chris Dunn definitely has potential. He has good size. LaVine has good size. He obviously has potential, and LaVine is already over a 20-point scorer. So that's really good for Minnesota. I get it, and I don't, because you give up a young player from that young core with Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. but you do get more serious. I don't think that this puts them as a playoff team, but it's very interesting because now what if they sign Derrick Rose and now they have Tom Thibodeau, Derrick Rose, and Jimmy Butler all back together. So that's something else you could look at because they are trying to trade Ricky Rubio as well. They were talking with Dallas for Wesley Matthews, but that stopped.
Well, I mean, as of now, Dallas doesn't really need another point guard. They took Dennis Smith at 9. So, I mean, they look like that kid, Dennis Smith, is, a great slasher, great scorer, and exciting player to watch. And that's really, I think, what they were looking for in a new point guard. I mean, that'll be pretty much a backcourt. Dennis Smith will probably either start or come off the bench behind Yogi Ferrell. They have Wesley Matthews, Seth Curry, who showed great promise last season under his new contract. So that's a really young backcourt with Wesley Matthews kind of anchoring it as a veteran presence. And I think that moving forward, Dallas will definitely try and move some of their assets, create a younger core. Obviously, Dirk's on his way out, even though he says he wants to play a couple more seasons, but it's highly unlikely it'll play more than 2 more seasons. So really, like, creating that young core kind of starts with Dennis Smith at 9 and kind of not dealing Wesley Matthews. They need someone to anchor that backcourt and keeping it that way. Because if they were to trade for Ricky Rubio is a great passer, but he has no scoring ability, and that's something that they need as a mentorship for Seth Curry, who's a scoring first player, and Dennis Smith Jr., who's an explosive player who has great passing ability, but definitely is a scorer first.
Yeah, and by the way, with the 42nd pick, the Jazz just took Thomas Bryant, center out of Indiana. He's going to be traded to the Lakers. Really just, a big body big. Definitely help the Lakers, especially with them getting rid of Mozgov. But back to the trade, Dennis Smith, or back to the Mavericks at least. Dennis Smith, he's out of NC State, is really going to be able to work in the NBA. I think he was a little undervalued because of NC State's lack of success this season, especially because of all the talent they had and what they could have done with Coach Mark Godfrey being let go at the end of the season. But I think he's definitely underrated, and he's someone that teams are going to have to watch out for because he's going to have a good career. Had an ACL injury his senior year of high school, didn't get to play his senior season. So he got to be at NC State for about 6 months extra than most of his class. And I think that helped him then, and it's certainly going to help him into the NBA. He's had 6 months over some of these rookies who are coming in, and that should be good for him in his career. Great scorer, very athletic, and he'll be able to keep that up at the next level.
I think that it kind of screwed over his draft stock a little bit just because of that injury. Because if you remember going back, he and Jason Tatum were the top 2 prospects coming into college that year. I think Jason Tatum was number 1, and that's ESPN rankings. But again, I just think the injury overall, because I think Dennis Smith still has a chance to be a really solid NBA player and definitely a starter in this league, probable all-star. And definitely Dallas is a good place to do that. So I think it's a steal for Dallas. The only reason I say that they could still do something with Ricky Rubio is just because Dallas is a team that still wants to put veterans around Dirk Nowitzki while he's still playing. Obviously, I think that once Dirk goes, they're going to commit more to their younger players. They have Nerlens Noel, Harrison Barnes, Yogi Ferrell, Seth Curry, Dennis Smith now. So I think that happens. I don't know if they'll commit so early just because Dirk still has some playing time left and they may want to try and get into the playoffs one more time, because I think if you go into the season right now with Wesley Matthews, who has been not very good these past 2 seasons, and Dennis Smith is your backcourt, and Harrison Barnes, who still really isn't that type of offensive player that any team would need him to be, they're not a playoff team. So I think that they're going to continue to try and add veterans to bolster their bench and their starting lineup. But we'll see what happens comes free agency. I'm very excited. I mean, I can't believe that free agency is already 8 days away. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. It's gone, but this dead period has gone by so quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's been crazy. I know it's not really draft, but talking about the Knicks maybe shopping Porzingis. You know, you got to look at that situation and be like, what's Phil Jackson thinking? You trust him for sure, but that move just makes no sense. I know Knicks fans are outraged because they've been behind very few of his moves, but the one they've always been for is Porzingis. And if you're looking at trading him, I know now it's kind of late and he's probably going to stay with the Knicks, but even that noise coming about is terrible for the Knicks because he's now lost trust in them. There's no reason to trade him. He's not really had any issues with the team other than his missed closeout meeting. But he's been really the star of that team besides Carmelo Anthony, and he's someone that they need to build around rather than shop him and use those assets to build around. Because even out of a top 5 pick, which can't happen anymore, there's still a good chance of that person being a flop. But with Porzingis, you know what you're getting. You know he's an all-star. He's going to be for years to come. And he'll probably go down as one of the best foreign players to ever play in the NBA. And certainly if his game develops, he could go down as one of the better bigs as we move into this transition of everybody has to be able to shoot to be able to be a good NBA player.
You know, the only trade offer that I think Phil Jackson fielded and proposed that really would have made sense for the Knicks was the offer to Phoenix, which was the number 4 pick and Devin Booker for Kristaps Porzingis. And, I mean, that's just absolutely outrageous because essentially if you break it down, Porzingis and Devin Booker obviously aren't the same player, not the same position, completely different games, but they're both franchise players that both teams are building around. So basically that cancels out. If you break down the trade, that cancels out. So basically New York was just taking the 4th overall pick, which turned into Josh Jackson, who by many is predicted to be the Rookie of the Year and have the most immediate impact for any team. So I think Phil Jackson is just going into complete panic mode because at the beginning of last season, in free agency, he built this team with the Derrick Rose trade and acquiring Joakim Noah and Courtney Lee and getting Melo to come back and having this core, this starting 5 that looked like it could be a playoff team, and it just completely ended in disaster. He's looking for a way to bounce back, and he's looking to make one of those outrageous moves that nobody sees coming just to get popularity back and just to gain ground and have the money to spend and to sign star players because no matter how bad they are, New York will always be a top destination for free agents. It's a mecca of basketball. It's where everyone wants to play. Everybody wants to perform in the Garden. So I think Phil Jackson really is just looking for a way to attract attention towards the Knicks and get, if it means trading Porzingis, then that's what he'll look to do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. That New York's always going to be a major destination, but the one thing I will say is I don't see anybody going there this free agency. With what Phil Jackson's doing and what they have, you're looking at a team, especially if they trade Melo, maybe they may trade Porzingis too. You really have no playoff players. That roster is not going to make the playoffs, and you're not going to see a player like Wade, a veteran at the end of their career, which is what you need to win championships now. And you need that to even be in the playoff hunt. I don't think anyone's going to be going to New York this year. They could change the culture there, but for them to become a major destination where you see a Wade or a Kyle Lowry going, that's going to take time because right now the image of the New York Knicks is not good.
The problem that not a lot of people are thinking about in this situation is if you deal Porzingis away, whatever you get back, and you're obviously going to want a number of assets. There's not going to be one player that you're going to find that's want to get traded straight up. If I'm the Suns, I'm sorry. I'm not giving you Devin Booker for Kristaps Porzingis. I'm not doing it. And that's about as best as you could go. Where I'm going with this is if you take players back, you're not adding more to your salary. And if you're talking about adding more to his salary with a Carmelo Anthony who's already going to be making $25 million, Courtney Lee set to be making, I think, somewhere around $12 million, Joakim Noah is going to be making around $16 million. You want to add more veterans that are going to be like 9, 10 plus mil to that. Who's going to sign to that? Nothing. And then they're going to have to go back and sign some of those guys like they had to do this year, like Maurice Endor, Ron Baker, those guys like that. And so, again, they're not going to be in a position to make the playoffs no matter what kind of veterans you add to that roster. If you're going to trade Porzingis, and it pretty much, I mean, you can't really trade Porzingis. You can't without screwing the team over. So what you need to do is you need to trade Carmelo Anthony. Easier said than done, mostly because he has the no trade clause. And Phil Jackson is so. I mean, the Knicks are just in a really tough spot because Phil Jackson has now slapped Porzingis and Melo in the face, basically saying, "I want you to play somewhere else." And just because Porzingis said he didn't go to an exit meeting, like Phil, have you taken a look in the mirror and seen what you've done since you've taken over? Like the only good thing you've done was you drafted Porzingis. And I like Courtney Lee a lot, but that's too much money for Courtney Lee. I didn't like the Joakim Noah signing to begin with. Every other signing has been trashed. The Derrick Rose trade was awful. I mean, they're just not in a good position. They're not going to be a playoff team for a while. And like you said, Dylan, they're not going to sign anyone this summer, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, no one's going to sign with them until Phil Jackson gets fired or James Dolan gets fired.
I mean, the thing that really came into play with the Derrick Rose trade and last summer's free agency was Phil Jackson went into win now mode. In the NBA, it's pretty much been proven that the better route to winning and making the playoffs, in most cases, is to tank, or not necessarily tank, but completely rebuild. I mean, we've seen that with Golden State. We've seen that with, the Clippers did that a few years back and got lucky with their draft picks, obviously, but we've seen that with multiple teams, and we've seen it with Utah, and look, Utah really showed out this season. And then on Phil Jackson's defense, we've seen the other way around, where win now mode works for Cleveland. It worked for Cleveland. They brought in LeBron and Kevin Love, and they won immediately. But really, he was bringing together players that have never played in the same kind of system. Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose have played together, but Derrick Rose, and they're both pretty much washed up, but they're bringing in players who don't gel well together. Their play styles don't gel well. Just because they have experience, Phil Jackson wanted to bring them in and to win immediately, but because their play styles didn't gel, they had no chemistry, and they ended up, not succeeding. And that's unfortunately becoming a trend. It was bringing in veterans, but, teams like Philly who are taking the 4 or 5 year rebuilding process and really embracing it. Look how they're turning out. It could go either way. And I think that the Knicks' best option is to completely clear house, keep Porzingis, and build a roster around him with a ton of cap space.
And fire Phil Jackson.
Fire Phil Jackson.
I mean, yeah, I'm having a hard time wondering why Phil hasn't been fired yet. Because if you look at the moves he's making, I understand he's respected around the league. And I love Phil Jackson as someone who grew up watching Kobe. I'm not going to call it the Kobe era. There's some debate around that, and that's not really what we're here to do tonight. But I grew up watching Phil Jackson's Lakers with Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, Derek Fisher. So I got a lot of respect for him. However, you can look at the moves he's making, like alienating Carmelo Anthony. You're the top guy of that franchise. I understand James Dolan is your owner, but everyone's looking to Phil. He's the guy people interview. He's the guy making all the moves. He's calling the shots. It's not Dolan. So maybe Dolan hired the wrong guy, and that may be his fault. But Phil's there, and if they go into tanking mode, he's going to get fired. And he knows that, so they're in a win-now mode. But it's hard to understand why he continues to do as he's doing, because maybe he'll never be fired because of his legacy and what he could bring to the table. But you got to think, what's going on? Is that going to happen?
Do you want to know why he hasn't been fired?
What'd you say?
Do you want to know why he hasn't been fired?
Yeah.
He's a security blanket, so that he gets all the heat instead of James Dolan. That's what it's pretty much been about. That is the only reason why he has been fired. Because outside of the whole Charles Oakley incident, when have we ever heard of James Dolan getting involved in anything? Never. And so Phil
It's
Jackson's
funny.
there to take all the blame for everything else. And even though he makes the moves, and technically that's still his fault, but what has James Dolan done for his organization since he took over? How many times have they made the playoffs? Like, it's not a lot. I mean, the last time they were even in the playoffs was like back what, like 12 or 13? It was something like that.
And
So
that's one of the premier franchises in the league that should be making the playoffs every year.
yeah, people should want to play there. So and they didn't do anything before Jackson was brought there. So now that you have Phil Jackson, he's doing all this stupid stuff. Take that away, but the attention still is being taken away from James Dolan and it's being placed on Jackson when the blame really goes back up to James Dolan. He is the one that is keeping Phil Jackson in office. And they just extended him.
It's funny though, because as we're talking about Phil Jackson making bad decisions and should be fired, the Knicks actually just took one of my favorite players in the draft, who I think will blow up as soon as he steps foot in the NBA. Damian Dotson from Houston. This is a guy who Houston doesn't get a lot of attention. I mean, Houston was big back in the '80s with Hakeem and Clyde Drexler, but Houston's been flying a little low on the radar lately. But you know, Damian Dotson is a knockdown shooter. It's someone who you give the ball to and he will make shots inside the arc, outside the arc. Just absolutely deadly. Put up like 23 points per game in his last season at Houston. Really, really developed over time. And I think, his combination with Porzingis gives them what they've been looking for. It gives them a young player, someone who, isn't a veteran that's going to be out of their prime or is out of their prime like Carmelo Anthony, who is a pick and roll or pick and pop disaster for opposing defenses because they have to play the perimeter and the inside. And they have to guard a 7'3" Latvian monster who can shoot the three and who can drive. And they got to play on Dotson who can shoot from anywhere in the half court. So, maybe, yes, Phil Jackson is definitely one of the top 5 worst GMs in the league. But, I mean, you can tell he has some upside in his drafting ability.
Yeah, for sure. Some big news. It's the second round, and the Milwaukee Bucks just took Sindarius Thornwell out of South Carolina with the 48th pick. Led his team to the Final Four, had a great run, SEC Player of the Year, put up great numbers. Another senior, was there for 4 years, was a leader. He always produced. That's someone that he could make an impact. You don't really know, but he's got the ability and the potential to make an impact there. It's hard to know how his game's going to translate to the NBA, but if he can win games like he won at South Carolina, any team's going to love to have him. And I think he's a great fit in Milwaukee with a young team that he's going to be able to gel with and become a part of. I definitely see him making the roster. I don't know if he'll make a huge impact, but he's going to be there and he's going to do what he can because that dude is a fighter and he plays hard every second.
Yeah, speaking of second round stuff, the Clippers just paid for the rights of Jawan Evans from Philly. So, that I think is a sign of the time's changing because that's LA reaching out and giving away salary to acquire part of their cap to acquire a point guard. And, we've heard the rumors, Chris Paul going to San Antonio, going to Houston. I think that signing Jawan Evans means that one of two things. It means Chris Paul is leaving. He's going to pursue free agency. I can't blame him if he does because he's one of the greatest point guards of all time and deserves to win a ring, and he's not going to win a ring in LA with the Clippers. It's just not going to happen in his career. Or he re-signs a 1 or 2 year deal with a player option and Jawan Evans plays behind him because Jawan Evans is, 6'0", a great scorer with decent passing, and I think that playing behind one of the greatest passers of all time will really benefit him. It'll really help him, and he's a lot like an Eric Bledsoe type of player, which the Clippers did find success with, and were able to move him in a great package to the Suns. So grooming Jawan Evans is really going to be a huge step forward for the LA franchise.
Speaking of LA franchises, Well, it looks like they weren't able to pull off the deal for Paul George. It didn't make much sense to me why they were going to try and trade for Paul George anyway, especially when he essentially says that he's going to come and play for you. Obviously, the only concern is that he gets traded to a contender, and that contender does really well, and that's your incentive to re-sign. Of the teams that have been rumored out there to get him, the big playoff teams, Rockets, Celtics, Wizards, just a few of those teams. I think that all three of those teams, they have packages that they can offer. In terms of the best package they can offer, I honestly do believe that despite what many people have said, that if Otto Porter agrees to a sign and trade, that the Wizards have the best trade package to offer. If you look at the Celtics, they have Avery Bradley and Jake Crowder. That salary, and they're also, they're in their primes right now, but they're gonna be coming out of their prime soon. And is that enough to get Paul George? I wouldn't. If they're not going to deal Terry Rozier, and obviously they missed out on the draft pick tonight, what other assets do they have? They can't trade Marcus Smart because he hasn't. The team hasn't accepted his option yet. They can't trade Kelly Olynyk because he's a restricted free agent. And so outside of that, if you look, the Rockets don't really have anything either. Like, what are they going to offer? Lou Williams and Eric Gordon. No one's going to take on Eric Gordon's salary, and especially not for Paul George. No one's going to take Lou Williams, 1 year left on his contract. No one's going to take that. They don't. All of their bigs are pretty much going to be free agents except Clint Capella and Harrell. So if you look at the Wizards, and if Otto Porter is able to agree to a sign and trade, that is the best thing around the entire NBA, not just those three teams, but the entire NBA, that a team would be willing to offer. He's better than anything else. I think if you throw in Kelly Oubre and a future draft pick, that has to get it done, and that's the best offer that the Pacers are going to get.
And I really think that goes along with the trend of the rebuilding mode and the process, because if the Wizards were to do that package deal, the Pacers will be getting a player in Otto Porter who's not even close to his prime yet. He's still in his mid-early 20s. A lot of room for development, has shown great signs of progress in his game, and they'll be pairing him with Miles Turner, who's another great young player, all-star capability, and obviously Indiana, to be quite frank, they had their shot in 2014. They had their shot to claim the East and potentially win a championship, and if they didn't, and that was when Paul George had his best season of his career, and they had another all-star on their team in Roy Hibbert. It didn't work, and it's time for them to move on. And if Paul George isn't going to win and he wants out of Indiana, then they need to deal him. And I think that I definitely agree with the Wizards packaging Otto Porter in a sign and trade will, one, free up a ton of cap space for the Wizards so they can sign Paul George, because, frankly, if they were to sign Otto Porter long term, they would give him the max after the season he had. Same with Bradley Beal last season. And so I definitely do agree with the Wizards. If they do pull off the sign and trade, they by far have the best trade package for Paul George in the NBA.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Really, the team that needs to deal for him is the Lakers, because he wants to be there, and maybe not signing him or trading for him is a turnoff to him. He may say, well, you guys really don't want me that much. I don't really want to be a part of your team, especially if he goes to a team like Cleveland or let's just say Golden State. But that won't happen. I'm just putting it out there. But if he goes to a contender, makes his first NBA Finals of his career, that may be enough for him to stay in that city. With LeBron leaving, you may not see him stay in Cleveland. But as far as what Washington can offer, sending Otto Porter to Indiana, Otto would agree to that, because he's where he is. He'll never have a chance to be the guy behind John Wall and Beal and possibly Paul George.
And even Markieff. Markieff is used as an option over him in the offense.
Yeah, for sure. So he's really the fifth, because sometimes Gortat on his good days, he's behind him too. So you're looking at Indiana, where he could get paired with Lance Stevenson, and those two could be the guys. Otto could show maybe he's an all-star. Maybe he knows how to run a team. and he could possibly help lead them to the playoffs on his own, show he's one of the better small forwards in the league, and it would just continue to be part of this growth that we've seen with Porter. From his rookie season to where he averaged something like 2 minutes a game, fans were chanting for him to get in the game because Randy Whitman would never put him in, to the Paul Pierce years, or the Paul Pierce year, where that's really where Otto grew, to Dudley, who finally Otto, was able to take from Dudley, but he could still outperform him. And then all the way up to now, where he just had the best season of his career, looks to be improving even more than he already is. And he could potentially begin to lead his own team if he were traded to the Pacers.
Yeah, going back to Paul George a little bit, I thought that once the Celtics traded the first overall pick, I thought that another move was immediately coming. I thought that it was either going to be Jimmy Butler or Paul George. It only made sense because you're getting a Laker pick now, a future one, but that's probably going to end up being like either late lottery or outside the lottery, because if you look at the Western Conference too, depending on how some of those bottom seeds turn out, the Lakers may or may not end up being a playoff team next year. And look, they probably won't. They probably won't. Last year, I honestly thought that the Lakers were going to be a playoff team, so don't shoot me down. But I honestly thought that with the talent they had, and obviously Brandon Ingram was a huge disappointment. But going back to the Celtics trade, I thought, like I said, that once they made that trade, that another move was going to happen. And now that they haven't made another move, and who knows, with the Porzingis rumor still, that could happen because that was the team that they were talking to the most about a Porzingis trade. But if another move doesn't happen now for a star player, this trade for them, it was pretty bad. It's pretty bad for the Celtics.
Do we have any closing thoughts from either of you guys before we get out of here, call it a day? Draft is still going on, currently at the 51st pick with the Denver Nuggets. And there's a trade first between the Hornets and the Pelicans, sending Frank Jackson to the Pelicans and Dwayne Bacon to the Hornets along with another pick. But do you guys have any thoughts before we get out of here?
I just want to say I think that the upcoming free agency will definitely be quite a roller coaster. I mean, we've seen with the draft, it's just been trade after trade, pick after pick. I mean, we've seen a star player in Jimmy Butler get dealt. We're going to see Gordon Hayward, an all-star, sign with a new team, most likely. And I think, with the Heat adding Gordon Hayward, they could definitely get up to the 4th seed in the East. I think that really the draft is just a window to show the path in which the NBA is moving in towards the rebuilding, more rebuilding instead of winning now, teams taking projects rather than 4-year seniors that have really shown that they know how to win. I think that the 2017 offseason is going to be a window into the change that the NBA is going to go through.
My final words is thank you, Kevin Durant, for not only ruining the NBA season, but you also ruined the salary cap for this coming year. We took a $3 million decrease from what it was supposed to be because of him wanting to sign to a team and dominating the playoffs and making it a very short playoff. So, round of applause for Kevin Durant for ruining yet another thing in the NBA, and I hope to God that the Wizards get Paul George so that we can make a run at it in the NBA Finals, because I don't care who does it this year, but someone needs to take down the Warriors this year. Someone's got to do it.
All right. Well, thank you, Evan and Brendan, for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. Please leave comments. Let us know how we did. If you want to see something like this again, let us know. Check out thewinningtake.com. Follow us on social media at thewinningtake. And keep letting us know what's up. Let us know what you want to see, anything like that. Hope to hear from you guys soon. Thanks for joining in.